Hi, I'm Rich Eisenberg, the managing editor of Next Avenue, the website for people 50 plus, and I'm here today talking with Carrie Shaw from Embodied Labs. Uh, Carrie is the founder and CEO of Embodied Labs. It's based in Los Angeles, and it is a leader in virtual reality healthcare and aging services immersive training. Put another way, what Embodied Labs does is it lets medical students and doctors and caregivers use virtual reality technology to see what it's like to be somebody with Alzheimer's or Lewy body dementia or Parkinson's or macular degeneration, hearing loss, or lung cancer with just a few months to live. So, Carrie, maybe you can just start by telling me a little bit about why is virtual reality a useful way to train medical students and caregivers and doctors about these kinds of things, about aging?
Virtual reality is really interesting because we've had decades of history using it in government, in kind of off commercial use cases for training. So we know from all these decades of research that when you put on a headset and you immerse yourself in an immersive environment, you can design that environment so that your brain feels like it's a lived experience. And so the research around learning has shown that if you compare a traditional way of learning something like a classroom-based lecture to actually learning that in an immersive environment when you're using your whole body and it's very experiential, and your brain feels like it's doing that in real life virtually, the retention of knowledge can be as high as 90% longer than that traditional method, and you can learn things up to even 3 or 4 times faster.
Wow.
So it's a very efficient and effective way to learn, and you can also do things in an immersive environment that you just can't do otherwise. So we use it in that sense of like, who can you actually embody and have a lived experience of that you can actually do as your own gender, race, or culture. And then immersive environments have also been shown to really hit on that emotional learning. So yeah, exactly. So you can really kind of gain a different set of skills through the technology.
Maybe it might help if you give us an example of sort of walk us through sort of an experience that somebody might use with Embodied Labs virtual reality technology. You pick one. I know you do this with lots of different types of examples, but pick one about sort of so set the stage what the story of the person is, and then who puts on the goggles. Am I saying that right, or you tell me? And then what do they see? What's going on?
Yeah. So when we design a new module or lab in VR, we have a whole pre-production process. I'm a medical illustrator, I have a background in public health, but we apply that same process an illustrator would to, say, writing or doing a drawing about a new surgical technique to how we design labs. So we research primary literature. We actually interview people living with the disease or condition that you're going to embody, and their care teams and medical experts in that area, and then we create scripts and storyboards that actually define how you'll interact and engage once you put on the goggles or headset or whatever you want to call them. And so one of the ones that's the most kind of popular on the platform is our Alzheimer's disease focused lab. And so we call it the Beatrice Lab. We try to use the person's name and not necessarily just the disease. And when you put on the headset for those modules, you're actually embodying this woman, Beatrice, who is a Mexican American woman. She starts out in her 60s and progresses to get her Alzheimer's diagnosis, go into middle stages and then later stages. But you're embodying lots of things, like what was it like for her as she was a classroom teacher, still working and starting to get early signs of memory loss. But then more than just memory loss, we think about what does language sound like? How do you speak your own words, and how do you hear words, and how does that start to change? When you're in the grocery store, how does looking at a list with words that like flower and flowers that look similar, how does that become challenging? What is your space in the world? How do you see light? How do you react to sound and see objects? So we really try to hit on all the regions of the brain and the cognitive domains in a very story-based way, so we can see holistically through Beatrice's eyes how this impacts aspects of her life.
And so, well, let's just continue with that. So, when somebody, say, a family member or a caregiver, um, of a loved one with Alzheimer's uses this, what do they gain from that? What have you seen? What's the experience been where people have finished with that and said, I'm assuming they've said things like, "Oh, now I get it," or what do they tell you is their reaction from going through this experience?
So one of the things we learned as a company, or about 3.5 years ago, as we were launching and designing the product, was how do you capture the impact and the so what of these experiences? So all the modules actually have a prepare and then a reflect piece to them, which helps us say, one, introduce what you're going to be doing in the headset, but also measure different things so we can answer this question. So we've seen a few areas of value. So one is competence. You see people learn pre and post things that they didn't know about the brain or about a disease or even about a culture, like how someone's culture impacts what their care preferences are. So we measure competence and behavior changes. We ask, what would you do differently? How would you approach someone or work with someone in a scenario where falls and agitation may go hand in hand after this module. So we see behavior change, more knowledge about culture. So all of our labs really hit on cultural competency. And then I think a couple other things we look at are burnout and people's value of the job that they're doing as a caregiver. And then I think a final one of those would just be thinking about emotional intelligence in as far as empathy goes and insight.
Um, Now, I understand that you were a caregiver for your mom some years back. She had Alzheimer's, I believe, and I wonder how did that play into the creation of Embodied Labs? I'm assuming there was a connection there.
Yeah, it's really interesting because being a caregiver for my mom throughout my late teens and then my 20s was really important to all the things I've learned about aging, at least initially. So I saw firsthand that I wasn't prepared to be a caregiver for her. I didn't understand her disease or, how to be there for her quickly, at the pace that I needed to be to serve her. And then I was home actually her primary caregiver for about 2 years with my dad, and at the stage where she needed home health aides. And so just firsthand saw that turnover and retention and recruitment, those were all things that we struggled with, and then the actual training of them. Yeah, so it was the impetus for creating what we've created today, which is what I wish I could have used, and I think that's kind of what we hear from our customers now.
Um, so you talked a little bit about how you've got different labs for different types of um, health conditions, I guess might be the best way to put it. Tell us a little bit. We talked a little bit about the one you have for Beatrice, the Alzheimer's one, but there are a few others. Why don't you tell us about them, and especially the most recent one?
So we started out and made a lab about macular degeneration and hearing loss. It's called the Alfred Lab, and you embody an African American man in his mid 70s. Also, tie-in themes there of delirium, depression, and dementia. So we used a paper case study that the University of Illinois Chicago's College of Medicine was just having people read in kind of a narrative form and transformed it into this lab. And then we did one following Beatrice, which was our second lab. We created the Clay Lab, where you embody a veteran who has you get a terminal diagnosis, and then you go through the end of your life and the decisions you have to make.
So that's about hospice care.
Hospice, yeah. And what is the active dying process, and how do you navigate care teams and decisions? And then the one that we made most recently and launched is the DEMA Lab, where you embody a Lebanese American woman. She immigrated to the U.S. early on in her life and owned a bakery, and then you embody her at the point that she has her early signs of Parkinson's and Lewy body, and then kind of navigate her transition from being at home as actually the caregiver for her grandchildren to then moving to a care community. And then we have one coming out here next quarter that's on LGBTQ issues in aging. So you embody perspectives of different lesbian, gay, and trans older adults and understand their journeys and kind of healthcare and aging through their eyes.
Uh, well, that's interesting, and I didn't know about that one. But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about what are some of the challenges and issues that you expect that lab will be talking about, because people may not understand why LGBTQ people might have any different issues with aging than anybody else might. So help us understand why.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a community that hasn't had a lot of attention and education given to it, and that was one of the things we heard whenever we design a new lab, we talk to our customers about what the ones are that they're using, and usually they have the best ideas about what things they want to do and see next, and that was how we created End of Life. They said we don't have a lot of resources here. And so we created this lab as a part of our process of listening to what people were saying. We don't have a lot of resources to educate people on LGBTQ issues and care. I think it'll be a really great way to get people insight, things we don't know
Right.
Also, I think more standards are coming out for ratings that say you have to do something to educate your staff. So hopefully it'll also kind of align with where the standards are going for communities. Yeah.
Um, and that leads me to my last question, which is, we're here in Washington. We're at the Washington Innovation and Longevity Summit, and I guess I'm wondering what role is Washington playing? Has it played? Will it play in the development of embodied labs? Are you seeing opportunities working through federal agencies and state agencies? Are there obstacles? Tell us a little bit about federal regulation and you.
So we've done a couple of things with mostly the AARP and a little bit with United Healthcare. They've hosted a number of competitions. So earlier on in our company growth, we were part of the Caregiving for Dementia Challenge, which was co-hosted by United Healthcare and AARP, and Open IDEO, which is a design firm for design thinking. And so we won that kind of most viable solution, and that was a way for us to start talking with them about how we could all think about health plan integration and policy. And then about a year and a half later, we won the AARP's Caregiving Innovation Challenge. So that was another way that we started getting involved with the Hatchery and their venture programs that they connect with startups and then work together to bring us to do events together, to use their subject matter expertise. And I think this conference, to me, it's like the perfect trifecta of having policy here, having insurance, health plans, and then having entrepreneurs that are meeting those needs to be the next solutions that we can mandate and back up with business plans and pay systems that sustain us.
Well, thank you very much, Carrie. This is Carrie Shaw from Embodied Labs. I'm Richard Eisenberg from Next Avenue. See you soon. Bye.